Good evening, folks, and welcome to another session from the Wise Asylum. Oh, we're into March. Whoa! Huh? Are we heading in the right direction? Well, it started off as a strange old month for me at the moment, but never mind. At least we're heading into the old spring, so that's got to be good. Well, there's been a lot going on. A lot going on in relation to this war nonsense. And a lot of stuff, and I don't know whether they've crept it onto media or not, but there's so much going on, it's looking really like they're either going to move it to something pretty serious, or they're going to come to the senses. And I very much doubt they're going to come to the senses, given... So we've had Belarus airfields have been attacked, and there's been border clashes, so that's another nation that could come in here on that. You see, this is how it starts, isn't it? It's just legal, and then all of a sudden, boom. There's been Dicky Birds had now been diagnosed with the flu after visiting the NHS, and apparently it's worrying. So what's going on there as we enter March? Anyway, China's sending kamikaze drones to Russia. Okay, I mean, it does look like there's a lot of drone stuff going on over there. If you look at some of these videos that are coming up. Another drone war. Obama set that off, didn't he? Interesting that he also sent up the regime Vlad the Impaler is intending to destroy, which again is interesting. I mean, this psycho Zelensky, now he's decided American sons and fathers must go to war for the Ukraine. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, who is he talking to? Is what I want to know. I don't think anybody that's saying outside of Ukraine is actually listening. He's been off to China, or going to China, is the old Zelensky. What's he up to there? And Putin again, nuclear threats going on in the old background. Ooh, that's not good, is it? Let's be fair. There's going to be no more oil to Poland, says Russia, because the Poles are getting a little bit excited and banging the war drum just a tad. 40 million angry Poles. Bring another nation in. Russia's doing fine inside Ukraine in relation to the war and what it's doing and what it's trying to carry out. There's no doubt about that. Losing a lot of machinery, losing a lot of men. But then so too are the Ukrainians and any other forces that are in there. So it's going on, but then, if you're listening to the media, Ukraine is beating everybody and it's amazing and fantastic. Well, it's really not going on at all. It's rather worrying, let's just say. It keeps going on. North Korea warns about declaration of war. Oh dear. I think the US has had some nuclear submarines down there in the old south of Korea. And the old numpty down there has jumped out of his cage and is rattling it a little bit. So that's another interesting point. And it would appear Israel is planning to attack Iran. So is that why all of a sudden they've changed sides and they're not so warm with Putin all of a sudden this week? As the US decided, yeah, crack on lads, you go on it then, we'll bag it. Is that the deciding factor in this little shift? Shift-a-rooney that's been going on with Israel, whizzing around and flitting between the all, and what's it up to? What are they up to down there? Because of course, Mr. War himself is now back in charge, isn't he? The Netanyahu. He's back in charge. And it's all back to normal because he does like to do the war. Is that representative of the first or precursor to the Ben David, who's going to be the Mashiach according to their doctrines? So, the precursor to that is Ben Yosef, the warmonger. So I have always wondered if Mr. Netanyahu isn't actually operational for that particular entity, which is interesting because it's all going on. And again, Saudis have now turned their back on Russia. What's been agreed? Something's been agreed, definitely. Now, Saudis don't really care much for the Iranians, do they? Because, of course, it's Sunni v Shia there. So, has a green light been given for some kind of move against Iran? That's interesting in and of itself. And Poland anti-tank barriers they put anti-tank barriers on the borders. So the Poles are really prepping for something. Maybe they're readying for what you potentially call a spring offensive by Vlad, because of course we're heading into the spring, so maybe they're sort of all prepping for something major in that respect. But again, you've got to keep your eyes on what's going on down there in the old Middle East, because it could be what Vlad's obfuscating there. But something's definitely happened this week that's changed quite a lot of things, and quite a few nations have just pulled that little bit further back from Russia. Also today, this week, it's been spoken that Germany should actually consider itself at war with the US because of some of the moves that are being made. And I did pick up an interview in the week where there was a phone conversation between two Democratic bigwigs up there in the old America. And the sentiment was basically they were discussing two sides towards creating animosity against keeping it going against Russia. Because, of course, the Europeans don't want war with Russia, they're not stupid. But basically, what we could see there, that the US does, and the sentiment towards the end of it with the F Europe. So there's something seriously going on with this Biden what? Without a doubt, that's certainly not operating for America. It's not operating for Europe, as it's pretty clear in there what we relayed in that phone conversation. So that's quite worrying, because of course Biden, you're looking at the Roman Empire, aren't you? So it's Rome destroying everything. It's Rome trying to cause all this animosity in Europe between individual nations, but also against Russia. So that can't be a good move. And so we look at Prussia. This is what Prussia wants in its move for this round of wars. But just keep your eyes on whatever's happened this week in relation to the Saudis pulling back, Israel pushing itself back under, or not under, but giving its light back to the US just suggests some kind of deal's been done for certain. The Romanian air defences have been deployed as well, so they're getting excited. And US markets are in a bit of a death zone. It's called the Cantillon effect, which does seem to be the case. You look at any of these edge advisors and that, and they're pretty much talking that. So that's going to be another big thing going on at the same time. And Russia's been testing nuclear. So all in all, it's nothing good coming out of the war movie gone live all over the show. So we do need to keep our eyes on that, because again, if they start to up this war, what they're going to be trying to do, conscript who? Not these asylum seekers, not these, all these that have come here as guests. They're not going to be going on it. So, you've got to see this move, if this is where they're going, for what it is. It's yet another hit on the white donkey to try and get him to go and commit hara-kiri if they haven't done so already during this last 3 years. And unfortunately, that's the blunt truth of it. Learned a lot in the last 3 years. Have they learned enough to see beyond this next trip? Well, they bedazzle you with aliens and all that malarkey. So, if you're mum, dad, your offspring, is that what you brought them up for? Just to send them off for a load of madness? a war in which weapons are being and money's being pumped into the place, and then going off to fund all these so-called terror groups, regimes that just like to kill the populations or the population of the nation they've invaded, do seem to be getting a lot more weapons because it's all being filtered through Ukraine. And that's not good, is it? So, but keeping this war going isn't good in that respect. It's certainly not good if, this went ballistic and all governments, because they were told to, started to declare war either and everywhere. But of course, they don't necessarily declare war, do they? Because all the wars today are being administered by the United Nations. And Korea was the first war in which war were carried out with no side declaring such. Because once the UN's in it, it's not a declaration of war, they're administrating a bit of fallout. It's money's involved somewhere, so of course in goes the UN, and they just administrate, and so they don't actually call it as at any point that war is declared. It's a clever strategy that they've used, and it's blinded people because it does take away all the energy in any nation in which war is declared, because everybody goes onto the war footing, but of course they've removed that, which is why it's got so far, and the military industrial is basically now fully committed all our armed forces to itself, and can move them wherever they want, and we have no say. So there's a lot of nonsense going on that's quite worrying, and we have to keep your eyes on it, is what I'll say. But back to last week, they really do need some new image, even if that's just what it's all being pushed to do. Wherever it may be, they need a new image so they can batter the living daylights out of everybody with an official story, and then when anybody's getting off track and not just complying enough with the fear, they can pump it out. All the media will talk about it just to put you back in your mental kennel. So there we go. Nonsense, more nonsense, and just diatribes everywhere if you actually look at that malarkey. Anyway, who's here tonight? So we've got Cos says, A up, Cos. PY says, an evening all, evening Paul. Debbie says, howdy with the cowboy hat. Could be something to do with a recent visit to that place that cannot be mentioned. The last pillar, hello, alright Sean, exciting night ahead. So we're just going to do a bit of a shindig on a couple of things, but some of it is very interesting, I have to say. Causers give it a alien handshake and the gigs. And the gigs on. Okay. Paul says, good evening Sean and fellow members of the Wise Asylum. Hello Paul. Untitled says, hit the like please. Cos says, only because you said please. Okay. Slipknot, alright Sean. Alright, Trevor, how you doing mate? Untitled Slipknot. Hello, he says. And everybody's saying hello. Winston Smith, good evening to you, Winston. Rose Snowman, even. Good evening to you. Or Ross rather, my apologies. And Mike says, evening Sean. Well, good evening, Mike. So if we just follow on a little bit from last week, because somebody sent me some. I've had a few interesting things sent this week, to be fair. The first one being information that has actually reminded me of two authors that I have actually come across and studied in depth years ago, Ignatius Donnelly and William Whiston. And I have wrote previous stuff about this stuff, and so it was good, because I had completely forgotten about these guys. So I've been seeking out some of the books, and I have managed to get one on site as a PDF, so very interesting. But these guys are your catastrophists, as they're called, or folk that kept in the mix the astrological sciences and how they relate and show consistent catastrophes all over the world. Not necessarily across the entire world at once, but there are always catastrophes going on somewhere on the earth. And generally, then religion would sort of apply the fact that it's being judged because they've become immoral or whatever. So these guys brought it back, and then of course Velikovsky. Now, in my opinion, although some of his stuff is quite worthy of study, the priesthood, in my opinion, were behind Velikovsky in order that he made sure the narrative that had been reminded, because remember, reset 1850, 1900, last thing they wanted were such as Beeston, Whiston, all these guys coming out reminding everybody that, wait a minute, no, this is what we all knew before. So, in my opinion, from when I studied all that, Velikovsky was definitely the priesthood plan to make sure it remained in sync with the priesthood narrative over the biblical lore. So, we will have a look at this fella. I just get it here. I hope you can see that. Can you see that alright, chaps? Because I'll make sure that we can see it alright as we go. So you should be able to see that without any issue and read it. That'll be good if you can. Yeah, can you see that? We do have quite a... I'll just check it if we can. So, Cummins Beaumont and the keys to world history. And he was all about catastrophists in collision. Beaumont versus Velikovsky. Now, Beaumont came first, and Velikovsky never actually acknowledged that he was aware of Beaumont's data. But everybody pretty much knew that he was aware of it, because a lot of his data is in sync with Beaumont's, but then a lot of it conflicts. And when I was looking at this back in the day, I could see clearly that this guy, Velikovsky, was always pushing it in sync with the priesthood tradition. So that's for other people to decide whether they see that or not, but that's how I saw it. It says, in 1970, after labouring for 8 successful years to promote recognition of Dr. Immanuel Velikovsky's work, I came upon the work of the British catastrophist writer Cummins Beaumont. I was puzzled that this name had not come to light during my many talks with Dr. V, nor did it appear while I was president of Cosmos and Kronos study groups for interdisciplinary science, a Velikovskyan campus-orientated effort, nor did it show up in the many activities and debates on V's behalf. It wasn't until I was cast free of the Velikovskyanisms and pursued my own studies of catastrophism that I accidentally came upon The Riddle of the Earth, the first of Beaumont's 5 books of a new catastrophism. Its title was The Attraction, but its contents proved to be even more magnetic. The book is written in the form of theses, over 100 of them, summarising his thoughts on cometary catastrophe. Written in 1925, it read like the 1950s bombshell, Worlds in Collision. One of Beaumont's central propositions took my fancy, that geographically had been falsified in the 4th century, and the Old Testament, Holy City of Jerusalem, was really Edinburgh, Scotland. This falsification was a deception promulgated by Constantine the Great in 325 AD at the Church Council of Nicaea. The Church then carried on a conspiracy to protect the deception in order to guarantee its dictatorial rule over the empire, and built a new city of Jerusalem in the Mediterranean. The role of Saturn. Another shocker for me was the role Beaumont assigned to the planet Saturn. As the key to world history throughout, thoroughly intrigued, I searched for the true and the false in his basic ideas. Beaumont's book, unlike V's, however, were long relegated to library morgues, and it took much persistence to acquire them. After considerable transatlantic correspondence and telephoning, I located one of Beaumont's daughters and a real treasure trove of information. An unpublished manuscript that Beaumont completed before his death. Beaumont was ahead of his time and ahead of Velikovsky. With his provocative conclusions and his unorthodox views on the history According to Beaumont, a large comet threatened Earth in the 14th century, so that's 1300s, specifically 1322 BC. Its debris meteorites caused a cosmic catastrophe that devastated early civilization, then centred in the Atlantis of antiquity, the British Isles. Now, let's look at 1322. We're also looking at the time afforded to Akhenaten. So again, we're looking at the time that they claim Israel started, but yet archaeological evidence doesn't start to show itself until 700 BC. So there's definitely there's more to be known in that arena. And we've examined stuff like this before in them, so we're not going to get into it now. But he's saying large comet threatened the Earth, specifically 1322 BC, which is also at the same time of all the troubles that were going on in Egypt, and specifically Akhenaten. So pre-Akhenaten, a lot of people fled Egypt because of what he was doing. And then when he was kicked out, they were all fleeing again. So it's a toss-up as to which bunch could have possibly made up what we know as the Israelites as they present it for the Middle East. Or is it, as these guys have said, it was all going on basically in the Northern Hemisphere, centred around the British Isles. Okay. So he's basically equating the time of Atlantis as being the British Isles. Plato's story of Atlantis and the biblical account of the flood of Noah were special attempts to record this disaster. The catastrophe so shattered the cradle of humankind's earliest civilization that it immutably altered the religious beliefs of its survivors, who fled to the golden Atlantean colonies in sunnier climes, themselves to become nations. Beaumont was an improbable heretic. In the years before and after World War I, he was a top-flight journalist, editor and publisher on London's famed Fleet Street, dealing primarily with politics, the arts and society. He was well connected in these fields due to his early work as assistant to publisher diplomat James Gordon Bennett, as private secretary to America's US ambassador to Germany, John G. A. Leishman. He travelled to many countries, acquainted himself with their customs and histories. He was confident and brother-in-law to the British playwright and theatrical producer Gerald du Maurier. Beaumont was the first to recognise and publish the fiction of his talented niece, Daphne du Maurier. A consummate establishment insider, Beaumont passionately pursued a parallel maverick career, developing ideas that challenged orthodoxy without relying on any of the divine intervention that is the backbone of contemporary creationism and biblical catastrophism. His ideas challenged accepted views of ancient history, its chronology, and its geography. The effects of comets. The crux of Beaumont's schema is that the history of our planet and the solar system within which it exists is largely the product of cometary intrusions and their effects. Its social life, its civilization, arose with the Celts in the north, especially in the British Isles and Scandinavia, the Atlantis of myth. Although there was no actual sinking of Atlantis, Britain and some of its western areas were permanently submerged, and the island was ravaged by electromagnetic waves of cosmic energy, exploding volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, storms, and tidal waves. As a result of the catastrophe, the temperature dropped. Beaumont identifies the main agent of this historical event as the planet Saturn, or Zeus, becoming a comet in myth, the serpent of the sky, and Phaeton, the terror of the skies. Its ravaged body produced a sun. A new planet equals a new sky god Jupiter, a new Zeus, to rule a renewed Earth. So none of this stuff's new. You know, he's only pulling back, in my opinion, stuff that were already that they were trying to get rid of through the last reset. And of course, here he's suggesting that it was the Atlantis. Now, last week when we looked at it, it came from the angle that perhaps what were created and centred around the British Isles was actually post the flood situation. So when you enter this kind of arena, there are quite a few different paths it can take you down. But the main problem and reason for that is when you get into the chronologies that they use, because they're all playing with chronologies all the time. Isaac Newton presented that for Queen Anne in a paper on giving her the best he could on making sense of biblical lore, but also biblical chronology. And he made it plain there. They're always adding on centuries, thousands of years, all sorts. And then you've also got Fomenko in Russia, who I think something valuable that he did bring to the table was the fact that it's not beyond the wit of these scribes that we are now living under their fantasy to take what was personages and events that happened in another country and then supplant them onto a different one again. So I'd say Fomenko has a bit of value there, but he's throwing a long one in the manner in which he presents Tartaria as being this supreme Russian sort of civilization, when pretty much, in my opinion, it's definitely it's the remnants of the post-Atlantean shifts of peoples to restart their nations everywhere else. But again, it's not decided. The jury's out on that, and it depends which path you take when you study this stuff, as to what data you get in each supporting the other, its own. So it's interesting when you get into this stuff, and I did enjoy it when I did it a long time ago. But again, it fits in with all this. So much of what we see in a lot of doctrines today are actually allegorical, in the sense they're talking about astrological truths, realities, counts, movements of each planet, etc., through each house of the zodiac. So it says Beaumont predates Velikovsky. Those familiar with the writings of Emanuel Velikovsky might well look into certain key features in Beaumont's corpus and conclude, perhaps, with a dismissive yawn, or Beaumont agrees with Velikovsky. But agrees with is hardly the case. Note that Beaumont's primary work in catastrophism, although under the pseudonym Appian Way, was published in 1925, he used his own name in 1932 on his second book, the keystone to these catastrophic theories. The book's contents are aptly summed up by its subtitle, The Origin, Building Up and Destruction of Worlds by Means of Cometary Contact. By the end of World War II, he was then in his 70s, Beaumont's journalism career was over, and he began to work on distilling his theories of catastrophism and even more revolutionary conclusions about history and geography. Beaumont's next two books, the first and second volumes of his trilogy, followed rapidly in 46 and 49. Neither were commercial successes. Beaumont completed the third volume before his death in 1953. Again, note that all but the last of these books were published before V's Worlds in Collision made its impact on this side of the Atlantic in 1950. In the years I was closely associated with V, roughly 1961 to 69, he never mentioned Beaumont or gave him so much as credit in the footnote of any of his books. The similarities between Beaumont and Velikovsky are too strong to be coincidental. It is Saturn's role in earliest history that provides Beaumont a smoking gun for his judgment. And now he's citing that he knew that Velikovsky knew of Beaumont. There are, however, a number of cases of parallel development of ideas on record. Perhaps the most famous is that involving Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, who both independently developed the main features of what has become known as the theory of evolution in the 19th century. It therefore came as a shock when I finally discovered that V did indeed know of Beaumont's earlier work. The disclosure came with the publication of Cosmic Heretics by Alfred de Grazia in 1984. De Grazia was long one of V's closest collaborators and friends, and a continuing acquaintance and correspondent of mine, dating from my own contact with V. In his book, de Grazia wrote, "Too many of Beaumont's conclusions are the same to explain them as sheer coincidence." A note exists in his archive mentioning having read Beaumont's 1932 book, The Mysterious Comet. The note dismisses the work, yet V expresses his wonder whether Beaumont had gotten his ideas by telepathy. De Grazia tries to ameliorate situation with a tenuous explanation. During the 1940s, V met with the Beaumont books at Columbia University Library, where he spent thousands of hours in research on his own books. The Columbia University Library possessed of Beaumont's relevant works only The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain, which was published in 1946. By this time, Worlds in Collision had been written. De Grazier also wrote, De Grazier's candor in revealing the link is admirable, but his apologetics leave a lot to be desired in terms of credibility. Telepathy. I wonder if that happy thought crossed Darwin's mind. Forgotten, everyone knew V, De Grazier included, as attested that V had a remarkable memory. What about the claim that V's research haunt the Columbia University Library contained only Beaumont's 1946 book, and that the manuscript for Worlds in Collusion was already complete at that time? Even De Grazier admits that there was a note that V had read Beaumont's seminal 1932 book, and V was well known as the last-minute tinkered with his manuscripts. So they're basically saying, you know, you can see that the fact that he's hiding the fact that he knows about that stuff, and then presenting it in the way he did. He were also friends. Velikovsky were friends not only with Darwin's lot, but also Einstein. Again, another saviour of the pseudoscience to keep the priesthood's script going. And that's your Einstein. Whereas Tesla was the guy that were giving you the real science, you know. And if that had got amongst the people, it could have been the end to this, you know, submission we all have to the power through energy that they provide. So again, you know, Einstein, another plant by the priesthood to save its own ass. There's so many of them situations that you can look back in. Bob Dylan, another, you know, because the movement that we're forming through universities and the folk music scene was starting to take hold and have a big effect on this continuing war in Vietnam. So through Bob Dylan, it's suggested with the lyrics from Leonard Cohen, which, if you actually give a bit of thought and look at, let's say, the best of Dylan's lyrics, you can see indeed that they would be, you'd expect them to be coming from the hand of Leonard Cohen. And that's how they did that, and it did the trick. And you can see that all over the show when they put these mind jobs in, when something's come in that could undermine the script in one way or another. It's why they keep Egypt so tight, so you never really get to see any other way than the way that they want you to see it. So we don't need, that's just basically he's going through the idea that he probably did plagiarise a lot of his work off Beaumont. But yeah, William Whiston, very interesting guy. Indeed. So if you ever wanted to, you know, if you actually want to pursue any further that stuff, it's not actually new. You know, it goes back quite a while. And each time somebody comes out with something good, out comes Mr. Shadow Man. You know, the guy on the right looks like a genuine guy to me, whereas the guy on the left looks like something out to Count Dracula. You know what I mean? One of Vlad's gangsters kind of thing. So anyway, so I just thought I'd share that with you because it is rather, you know, it's a hell of a rabbit hole if you start to go down that. So I just thought, just for a reminder, while they keep trying to push this more tax, let's have a look at where at this moment in time we're getting all the pollution that they're all crying about. Well, unfortunately, it still does appear to be over there. What's it keep going off for? In China and northeast India, but definitely mainly China. And then if we go CO2SC, which I thought, when you look at this, so that, you know, as it's moving to the light blue, it's getting more concentrated. So, okay, so you'd expect to find it over China, you would say, but not in the amounts you might expect, given what we've just seen with the other pollution it's giving out. You've got some over the middle of America. You've got some up there in Washington and BC. And then look, what's really telling is, look at where it really is over northern Asia. Siberia. There's no industry going on there. That suggests to me that this bluey-green haze that's classed as CO2SC is a natural chemical. And it would appear to be being released more if we take Siberia, mid-America up to BC and Washington, to be in areas where there isn't any industry, just a lot of land. So again, you start looking like that kind of stuff. It's just, it's all garbage in it, let's be honest, and as well, And then a third, there you go again, always mainly focused India, China, and you've got some others, but that can't just be tied to industry, you know what I mean? It's got to be tied to other things. And surely what they're doing with the geoengineering, you'd expect it to be showing up, wouldn't you, on this kind of stuff, in all fairness. So, just, if you chose to go down that path, there are a few twists and turns. Archaeopteryx is in there, all that work. But basically, this previous civilization, the one that they've been destroying for all these centuries, was basically centred around the British Isles. Old Constantine there shifted it all over. Because they had a lot of problems, didn't they, keeping hold of Britannia. So moving any history around it would have given Rome itself full command over the narrative, wouldn't it? Of, pulling the Old Testament while giving the Gospel, but giving the Old precedent slowly but surely throughout its history, right up until we already are today. So, they would have to do that. It makes sense. They would build it up. Why not? If you can't make sense out of Britannia because you just can't gain control, even though you've killed all its druids and big swathes of its population, you give up, don't you? Let's build our own over here. We'll change the script. So, again, that's all possible. So, if you go with Wilson and his mate, I forget his name, their chronology is slightly different. They pose as destruction, is it 500s AD, if I remember rightly. But again, what it does show when you get into that kind of work is that it does appear to be a lot of destructive events that go on this earth as normal, and it's generally brought on by things that are going on up there in the old sky. So I don't know whether this is boring you, this stuff, or not, but it is quite interesting. You don't think, like, the climate change map seems good? Yeah. I think it sucks a bit of juice when that comes up, actually, in all honesty. But it's worthwhile having it in your browser just to keep your look on, because they're telling you one thing, well, there's the evidence. So clearly what they're telling you isn't based on the evidence, is it? It's obviously based on some kind of pseudoscience. So that, again, there's evidence for you. Well, where are you going? It's here. Why are we paying? Why are we being closed down to cavemen mode when it's pretty clear it's all going on over yonder? Evidence, you can ask questions, can't you? You can even send that image to your councillor, to your MP, and just say, can you just explain this? Because remember, your MPs are there to act for you. We know that they don't, but that's because nobody makes them anymore. Not enough people are badgering them to actually make them act on the subjects that you want them to act on. Because the only way you're going to get them out of the whip system is when all of a sudden all the people are going there badgering, telling them, well, hang on a minute, this is what we want. Here's your evidence. Get that question in Parliament. Because most questions in Parliament are pure garbage, apart from sort of the periphery MPs who actually probably do care about the constituents. But in the majority of the further, closer to the front bench you get, the more gobbledygook they speak. So I've got this, a few little bits here that are very interesting. And it's a bit of law. But just before we do that, I'll just have a look at this map, because I picked this up. So this is the map after Herodotus of Halicarnassus, and this is circa 484 BC to 425 BC. So this is the map that he had for Europa. And if you notice, it's got right down into Persia, so this is your Aryans. It's got the big chunk of North Africa under its wing and classed itself as part of. I noticed that Britain isn't there, the British Isles isn't on this one. So obviously the British Isles wasn't classed as part of Europa. So that is an interesting map. And at the top you've got Hyperborea. So again in 484 BC, this is the way the mind saw the civilization. Because all maps are showing you basically, aren't they, the different civilization. But there you've got all this together, all these different, so you've got Scythian there, you've got Sacan. Well, Sacan is the description for all the tribes that come under the label of Scythians. So it's the Saka. This is where your Buddhism begins. It's the same kind of thing. So, and we've discussed that Aryan doesn't actually mean white race, it means noble. So the Aryans are classed as the noble race. So I'd say this again is showing us a big part of this empire that existed. And so it's making me think and look about this, they call it the collapse of the Bronze Age. Now I think we can start to see that that is actually a fantasy. And that all the fuss and nonsense that went on when they class it as the collapse of the Bronze Age is in fact covering up the fact that this kind of thing is what we broke up by it all. You know what I mean? It's interesting. It's very interesting. And also, got to keep in mind at all times that these events could be closer to our timeline than official chronology gives us. You know what I mean? So the 6,000 years of creation that's in a lot of the doctrines could be the actual time and point at which this catastrophe took place. And there were mass migrations before because they were watching the skies, and after, and these are the nations that they created after they left what was classed as the Atlantean lands, which would have included the Americas. So it does get interesting. It does get rather interesting if you do get into that kind of stuff. Now, it's just somebody sent me this. Now I'm going to have to come back to you because I want to see that you guys can actually see. You couldn't see any of that, could you? Oh shit! Right, give me a sec. My apologies, because I have to show you the map, don't I? And I've just shut it off. Oh shit! Wait a minute. Can I get it? If I can just, where is it? So I've made a right cock up of that, haven't I? I can't remember where I put that map. I'm getting worse. There it is. Right, sorry, chaps. Because I think it is important that you at least get to see this map. So there's the map. But at the top you can see Hyperborea, you can see the Scythian, you can see the Sacan, which is Saka, describing the Scythians. And this is 484 BC. Europa. Look at all North Africa that it's took part of. All Egypt, Arabia, Persia, down to almost down to India. It's an interesting map. But notice, no British Isles anywhere to be seen, which again is quite interesting. Now then, so this is what I want. So what I'll do, I'll come back to you on here because I want to see that you can see this. So could you see that? Not the map, could you see the paperwork that came up? Because this is exceptionally interesting. It's a brain. Well, you could see that, but what I was just trying to get across there is that Europe, or Europa as it were termed, actually incorporated all of North Africa. You know, because you get Moroccans and Berbers and all these kind of things. Clearly, it might not have been always a non-white sort of area. But then, again, when you get back into history, they weren't actually interested in race. That's where your will first came in. As we discussed, they sort of put that idea that we were different races into the mix. Which makes you wonder, you know, when did they actually create these religions that have really divided us? Right, but you can zoom it in, you say. Let's have a look. So if I come off that, oh, no, there we go. So, so this actually, if we go back to the diagram of Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick, there's something going on first, which of course we didn't include on that. So I thought we'll go through this. Now this is an email sent to me this week by a guy who clearly knows what he's talking about. And I thought it is important, and because we're so close to me doing that, we'd be wise to continue it. So I'll just check everything's alright and that you can see it. We can only see your control screen. Still, survive. Maybe we'll get through this together. So you should be able to see that now. Can you still see just the back screen? I'll have to come back in. You can see it then. Right, oh that's alright then. Okay. So this is an email. So this is interesting. Very interesting. So it says the reason for the email is I can help you. It says, I know you've looked into intellectual property, however I'm not sure if you've looked at patents and the various types from land to plants, breeder rights and community variety rights. It's all about the words, as you know. I can send you some work I have done in this regard. The first trust object is the Bill of Exchange the biological mother creates prior to being born by her completing my birth plan. Right? Now, I'm not sure how long this has been going on, but we do know the Midwifery Act was created in 1902, and then you got the World War I, orphans everywhere, served its purpose. But then, not until we get to 1925, when they change everything again, and then at 31 they put the birth certificate on the stock market, so the trading, the instrument. So what he's saying here is, because if you remember on the diagram, we spoke about how Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick do the deed along comes little baby, or as they determine it, boy or girl, yeah? So he's in Genesis 1, a boy. Not until they bring him into that first trust at register where they'd conjoin Johnny Ray as a calling, because what are you called? So instead of calling it a name, you could refer to your first names or second name as the calling, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's what they called you. Is it a name? No, not until it gets fixed into on paper, from the spoken to the written. Yeah, so when they call your name, it's a spoken, but when it's written down, it's a written word, isn't it? And so it's manipulatable then. So he's a boy when he's born in he's Johnny Ray in Genesis 1. At registration, then he becomes a child. Okay? And as we discussed, because Mum and Dad are trustee in that trust, and underneath already through their misunderstanding of the situation, of now have to operate according to the whims and willies of the Crown and its agencies set against Johnny Ray. So this is what came before, according to this guy that sent me this email. He says, my birth plan, the real mother completed a pregnancy care plan, nowadays known as my birth plan, during her pregnancy. The birth plan, by the definitions of the word plan, is a draft or a form, a representation of land or water, a scheme devised, a project, as the plan of a constitution of government, an order for the payment of money drawing from a post, a bill of exchange, a bill of lading, an allowance on weighable goods by the Queen to the importer or by the seller to the buyer. She enters details of her partner, which implies a joint owner of stock or capital employed in commerce, an associate in any business, a husband and companion, thus a friend to treat as a friend of the court. The word draft implies a draft letter, patent, that is not signed by the monarch in person. Instead, the monarch signs a warrant authorising the preparation of the letters patent, traditionally written in ceremonial calligraphy on vellum, and approving the draft text of the letters patent. Then, once the letter patents are prepared, they are sealed with the Great Seal, without the need for the signature of the monarch, because royal authority for issuing the letters patent had already been given by means of the warrant. The word device means something ingeniously conceived, devised, skillfully made, especially whereby to work a trick or fraud. The plan does not mention the delivery of the birth cake, known as the afterbirth or second-born child, but only refers to when it is delivered. Thus, this is an omission of everything else, such as how it is treated and what happens to the mother's placenta. What happens to the newborn's materials, such as the cord, flesh, manure, blood and waters. A child is seen as a shadow of the mother, and a conflict arises between the fetus and mother. The mother's rights take priority before the sibling fetus. What happens to the afterbirth may be misrepresented or misinterpreted to be female genital mutilation and blamed on the newborn, which in itself is wrong and immoral. Did you get that? That's rather... If this is what's going on, this is beyond sick. The Family Reform Act 1897, Section 18, Succession on Intestacy, is evidence of the fact that Part 4 of the Administration of Estates Act 1925, which deals with the distribution of the estate of an investate, or a person, artificial or natural person, whose father and mother were not married to or civil partners of each other at the time of his birth, and shall be presumed not to have survived by his father or by any person related to him only through his father, unless the contrary is shown and has been shown, and in a register of births kept or having effect as if kept, under the Births and Deaths Registration Act 1953, or in a record of a birth included in an index kept under section 31 of the Act, indexes relating to certain other registers, etc., and where a person who has a parent by virtue of section 43 of the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act of 2008, treatment provided to woman who agrees that second woman to be parent, such as the midwife as a second parent. In section 51 of the Administration of Estates Act 1925, which relates to the construction of documents, the reference to part 4 of that act, or to the foregoing provisions of that part, shall in relation to an instrument inter vivos made, or a will or codicil coming into operation after the coming into force of this section, be construed as including references to this section. I mean, that's a bit complex. I'm going to have to go over that again a few times, I think. The word index means a key, so the instrument is for shutting or opening a lock to the family vault and land, locked inward to which they belong, in a time frame which binds an arch, to explain a cipher in the Romish Church, ecclesiastical jurisdiction, or the power of the Pope, or the power of excommunicating or absolving, a bank built on the side of a safe harbour for the convenience of loading and unloading ships and securing them in their stations, hence furnished with posts, rings, cranes, capstans, etc. Index and the heads there referred to. Cemeteries also have burial sites that are indexed. From Bouvier lost. What was once possessed and cannot now be found. When a bond or other deed was lost, formerly the obligee or plaintiff was compelled to go into equity to seek relief because there was no remedy at law, the plaintiff being required to make profert in his declaration. But in process of time courts of law dispense with profert in such cases. I'll have to check that word actually to see that is the correct word, and it hasn't. It's not something else, but he's done it twice, so I would suggest that is the correct term. In such cases, and therefore obtain concurrent jurisdiction with the courts of chancery, so that now the loss of any paper other than a negotiable note will not prevent the plaintiff from recovering at law as well as in equity. When a negotiable note has been lost, equity will grant relief. In such case, the claimant must tender an indemnity to the debtor and file a bill in chancery to compel payment. Trade secret. My birth plan is penned by the biological mother. One has reverse engineered these processes where there is the creation of a bill of exchange and then a certificate of deposit for set off or discharge debt known as a birth certificate. The law defines trade secrets as all forms and types of the following information: financial, business, scientific, technical, economic, engineering that includes patterns, plans, compilations, program devices, formulas, designs, prototypes, methods, techniques, processes, procedures, programs, codes, and includes tangible or intangible, and whether or how stored, compiled, or memorialized physically, electronically, graphically, photographically, or in writing. Now remember, people, the hashtag means digital content. Okay? So every time you're being told to use a hashtag, You need to know that that's what it means. So give that some thought. Okay, where am I? The law also provides the condition that the owner has taken reasonable measures to keep such information secret, and that the information derives independent economic value, actual or potential, from not being generally known to, and not being readily ascertainable through proper means by another person who can obtain economic value from the disclosure or use of the information. The first register created, and thus a trust document, as it possibly includes my birth plan, the bill and certificate of birth, see Black's law, that states this is sealed in court. So that's exceptionally important, right? This is the problem. The doctor's certificate, the NHS Foundation charities register the baby using the interim NHS numbering service, INNS. In plain English means INS. The newborn person is registered and they notify Child Health Services, the NHS Newborn Hearing Screening Service and the Office for National Statistics. This ensures babies receive NHS number to support immediate and ongoing care, which, remember, they have then a duty of. Prevents errors and duplicate registrations, supports screening of newborns and infants, enables information to be shared between health and care organisations, and births to be recorded accurately for population statistics, and everything that these words and acts imply. This act to register, and by virtue of definitions, the newborn infant's footprint is put on the backside rear of the instrument known as certificate of birth, and further evidence of the first original certificate. So they've written on the back of it, and of course they're trading it. Now, also take on board, I mean, when I was married and we're having mine, I couldn't believe my wife wanted to go and get this image of a splodgy thing inside her belly, because I just knew it weren't right. I knew that going through the actual procedure would be throwing radiation all over your offspring and in you. So I didn't like that for a start. But what I thought about, well, when I read this, is that they've now got an image of your unborn, haven't they? And also bear in mind what I said when we were looking at the diagram, is that they're using the term born into sin. Now, when you get back into the old ancient stuff, they're talking about the purity of breath. It's about cleaning that breath of life that you're given at conception. But of course, that breath of life has now been infused inside with your soul with two genetic programs, each of which are absolutely full of pollutants, pollutant codes in all manner of things. So from the get-go, you're born into that. The Vatican are taking you in trust on this dark side situation, yeah, from which all else is created in the shadow ledger, yeah. So think twice, ladies, about going off and getting these images, because you're actually giving them the ability to form documents as statutory declarations even. But then you're really not the image of that image. So maybe I'm thinking a bit too, maybe just a bit too out there, but it does need to be thought about. Is that why they get every female to do this? Okay. From family law books I have read, I have established as follows. Mothers do have legal rights in the family courts, but they also have responsibilities as a parent, because they're trustees themselves, yeah? Responsibilities as parents, such as providing a home for the children to protect and maintain them, as well as disciplining the child, ensuring they're educated, agreeing that necessary medical treatment, naming the child, and looking after a child's property. So you have a responsibility to name the child. But of course, you're actually giving it a calling. You're naming it when you go in there and register it's being born. And looking after a child's property. A child is the flower and fruit of the biological mother. The newborn infant, or man, is the fruit and flower from the mother's egg and the father's seed. Some food for thought with regards pending suits, pending patent protection, patents for private equal exchange such as my birth plan, and patents in the form of breeders' rights and community plants for public commerce and profit. Now from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, patent, construction, that which is open or manifest. This word is usually applied to ambiguities, which are said to be latent or patent. A patent ambiguity is one which is produced by the uncertainty and contradictoriness or deficiency of the language of an instrument, so that no discovery of facts or proof of declaration can restore the doubtful or smothered sense without adding ideas with the actual words, will not of themselves sustain. A latent ambiguity may be explained by parole evidence, but the rule is different with regard to a patent ambiguity, which cannot be explained by parole proof. The father's secondary registration is done by parole evidence. However, the instrument is uncertain and contradicts facts and has deficiencies of the language which requires adding new ideas. Therefore, the secondary registration, entry of birth and death, is a patent ambiguity. In regards to patents, the first step is to examine the object, the tangible thing, something perceived with or presented to the senses, purpose or thing aimed at, to bring forward as a ground of opposition, doubt or criticism, raise an argument against a proposition, a line of reasoning, etc. To cite as grounds for disapproval, set against, examine from a material object. The word object is an object on display as an ornament. 1857, from French objet, especially an objet d'art, from Latin obiectus, see object. In English, object d'art is attested from 1865. An ornament is a registered design and may overlap with patent law. Pending suits. Object, implied adultery. So, from the definitions only and not by fiduciaries answering questions or serving proper notice of a pending suit, one has established that a pending suit appears to exist. From the constitutional definitions from Bouvier's dictionary, adultery is a criminal law matter. In England, it is left to the feeble hands of the ecclesiastical courts to punish this offence. Adultery in one of the married persons is good cause for obtaining a divorce by the innocent partner. The questionable secondary birth registration is evidence of the non-English caution using dog Latin script. The newborn is given the benefit of the doubt in regards to any misinterpretation of the biological father's oral speech during the registrar's questioning, because the benefit of doubt flows from the draftsman. This is because will is necessary to the commission of a crime or the making of a contract, which requires the meeting of both minds and the autographs of the parties and independent witnesses. A person coerced into either has no will on the subject and is not responsible. See, that's important. This is, when we go back to that diagram and they've created these trusts, we have no idea that when we're proclaiming the name, when we're all these proclamations we're making, we're picking up these instruments, we have no idea about this because there's been no meeting of the minds. And the autographs of the parties, of ours, which are usually signatures, which is the most important thing in all cases, are again taken under a fraud. We don't know this stuff. Therefore, any assumed contracts are null and void. Yeah, no meeting of the minds. Bouvier's confessions should be received with great caution, as they are liable to many objections. Thus, the entry as a non-English foreign word or sign that translates to the word caution in regards to identity that has been carefully thought out of the boxes. There is a danger of error from the misapprehension of witnesses. The misuse of words, the failure of a party to express his own meaning. So, like I keep saying, if you go into the statutory declaration, it's so important that you learn the importance of interpreting any words you're using that you know have many different meanings. If you interpret your meaning in your use of it on that page, in all cases, you remove that. Okay? You remove any room for judging by anybody else. Confession. Hang on. So, the failure of a party to express his own meaning. The prisoner being oppressed by his unfortunate situation and influenced by hope, fear, and sometimes a worse motive to make an untrue confession. A confession must be made voluntarily by the party himself to another person, and if it is obtained and forced from the mind by the flattery of hope or the torture of fear, then it comes in so questionable a shape when it is to be considered as evidence of guilt that no credit ought to be given to it. But what amounts to a promise, a solemn pledge, a vow, a declaration in reference to the future made by one person to another, assuring the latter and the former will do or not do a specified act, or a threat by oppression, coercion, menace related to trouble or make weary, to vex, to push, to press or squeeze, to incite quarrel or conflict, or conditional declaration of hostile intention, or to cause danger or harm. Now that's actually what the police are doing. This is exactly what the police are actually doing. Everything they do is being obtained and forced. Yeah? It's all being forced. And so it's null and void. But obviously first you have to understand all the other stuff. Threaten is of very general application in both great and little things, as to be threatened with a cold, a threatening cloud, to threaten an attack along the whole line. Threaten is used with infinitives, especially of action, but menace is not, as to threaten to come to punish. Menace belongs to dignified style and matters of the moment. So menace is the word to consider using in relation to pointing out that you instead of under threat, that you feel under menace. Now, object, forced partial abortion. From Wikipedia, the official teachings of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, promulgated by Pope John Paul II in 1992, oppose all forms of abortion procedures whose direct purpose is to destroy a zygote, blastocyst, embryo or fetus, since it holds that human life must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception. Now, the reason why that has to be the case is because the Vatican takes the boy or girl in trust as born into sin, and it's there to take care of its spiritual life. So when you get anybody that claims to be a Catholic, no matter how high they are in the gravy train, saying abortion is correct, then you need to start to recognise in your minds that what you're looking at is not a Catholic. A Catholic couldn't do that. You know what I'm saying? And it's the same way when Protestants say they're not Protestants. They're just claiming that to confuse people. You know what I mean? If you have your own morality, you know where you're at with that. But that's basically the reason why the Catholic Church could never promote, because it's undermining itself. It's undermining its very reason for existence. which is basically to administer all those in sin. So from the first moment of his existence, a human being must be recognised as having the rights of a person. Now it gets a bit odd, because of course they've created that person, because they've took the boy or girl and took it in trust as a person. Yeah? Among which is the inviolable right of every innocent being to life. However, the Church does recognise as morally legitimate certain acts which indirectly result in the death of a fetus, as when the direct purpose is removal of a cancerous womb or placenta. Canon 1397 of the 1983 Code of Canon Law imposes automatic latae centennae excommunication on Latin Catholics who actually procure an abortion. So Biden and all these people, they tied into the Roman Empire. So anybody you see around them, also imperial operatives, just fronting themselves as whatever it is they're fronting as. Object, killing in the name of. It says from in brackets. Etymology online, infanticide. A noun, 1650s, the killing of infants, especially the killing of newborns or the unborn. In the 1670s, one who kills an infant, from infant plus side, perhaps from the French infanticide, 16th century. In Christian and Hebrew communities, infanticide has always been regarded as not less criminal than any other kind of murder, but in most others, in both ancient and modern times, it has been practiced and regarded as even excusable, and in some enjoined and legally performed, as in case of congenital weakness or deformity among some of the communities of ancient Greece. Yeah? So did you notice that in Christian and Hebrew communities alone? So when you're looking at these people that are pushing abortion and then claiming to be this, they're claiming to be that, no, they cannot be by default a Christian or from the Hebrew doctrines. They are showing you that they are something else. Yeah, now it's coming through this Prussian scene, remember, as we've said. So every time they open their mouth to that effect, they're actually declaring themselves neither Christian nor of the Hebrew, which cancels out mainly all the religions except those that are holding on to the Talmud. As in, yeah, I've done that, okay. Object, from Bouviers, letters of administration, pendente light. Also, as the secondary birth registration implies by definition of an oral will without formalities, the certificate is and is not limited to letters of administration, pendente light, being letters granted during the pendency of a suit in relation to a paper purporting to be the last will and testament of the deceased. There is no probate court seal. Now, remember about deceased. We automatically think in terms of when your body dies, but the games that they're playing out in the Eden leisure, everything they're doing is putting you in a position of being of the underworld, isn't it? And deceased, dead, lost at sea, whichever term you want to. So we have to start looking at these terms when these people are using them. It might not just be relevant to that death certificate, as in the one you get when you've died, or your family get, or the state gets, more importantly. It could in fact be talking directly from the fact when these trusts are made until they finally get you to sign yourself off as Johnny Ray Lipstick, or as they're putting out today, Lipstick Johnny Ray. That you might have to consider that to understand the depth of that. He says there is no probate court seal. Object, letters testamentary. Letters testamentary are conclusive as to personal property, while they remain unrevoked. As to reality, they are merely prima facie evidence of right, proof that the testator was insane, or that the will was forged as inadmissible. But if the nature of this plea allowed the defendant to enter into such proof, he may show that the seal of the supposed probate has been forged, or that the letters have been obtained by surprise, or been revoked, or that the testator is alive in substance, that when any person shall die, leaving bona notabilia. Can you see that? Revoked. Interesting word. Testator is alive. Yeah? You automatically, in your program, the edit you've got, you either word dead or alive, you automatically see body dead or body alive. Not seeing it in the higher frequency of, no, this is all about this hidden ledger that they've got going. So that the data is, you personalize it to physical, but they're talking Holy Ghost kind of. Yeah? It's, honestly, it's quite, not very good, to be quite honest, but never mind. The signature of the king is needed when dealing with persons' assets after death, which a royal signed direction is issued by and through the Department for Social Development under power delegated to them. This procedure is used to identify a charitable beneficiary, where there is uncertainty about a beneficiary named in a will. It enables a direction to be made as to the charitable organisation, which most nearly reflects the intention of the person who made the will, and the direction as arose out of the administration of the estate, which left a bequest to a body which had been closed. This is something which is relevant to one's organisation. This is separate to the ability of the Charity Commission to make a Cyprus scheme. And remember, folks, isn't everything now under charitable status? Everything they're doing now is about first securing your assets. By all means, we looked at the dark web's ability through using companies like Beta, how that they're using that to steal identities and county line people and create a new. Anyway, we're not getting into that. But it makes sense when you've got that data and you're aware of that going on. You can see this is why charities outside the Charity Commission. You know? There we go. Now, it just rounds off and says, I hope you have the time to read the data and enjoy reading it. I'm happy to help you and equally need some help. Well, Jim, I've read it out on the live stream because I felt it was exceptionally important. And I've thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I would be more than happy to communicate with you again, without a doubt. So, thanks for that, Jim. Interesting stuff, guys. What do you think? Interesting stuff, by golly. I just need to pull now. Just before I come back to you and have a chat, have a look at this, because this is what Australia's doing. These are leaflets being handed out in Australia now. Is your name registered? When you were born into this world, your parents registered your birth with the Registrar of Births and Deaths. Further, your name is registered in various other places in the world, as for instance, when you were admitted to school, when you're recruited into a job, when you buy lands and houses, when you insure your vehicles, when you open a bank account, when you obtain a ration card, when you obtain a voter's identity card, when you obtain electricity connection for your house. Now, they're using when you. We know, of course, that the only thing that obtains all those things, all those instruments, is the person. Isn't that the case? The person has bank account, the person has a date of birth, because unless you look like a ship, you were born. So important you shift that in your mind properly. Because when you can achieve that, then a lot of the stuff that I talk about that I know you're struggling with, it makes perfect sense. So, obviously, I'm trying to get you to the point where you receive the key to opening up all this stuff in a different way. So you see it. You're not just guessing and hoping for best. If your name should be registered in so many places in order to live in this perishing world, then how about heaven? Is it not necessary for your name to be registered in heaven right now, if after your death you have to live there in joy and peace throughout an incorruptible eternity? Yes, your name must be surely registered there right now. So obviously you've got here a right bunch of Johnny-come-latelys, obviously trying to recruit seed planting and recruiting, I wouldn't say disciples, they'd be followers, wouldn't they? And that is going on right now in Australia. I mean, come on, folk. You know, you really... I know you guys are a long way on understanding what it means, registration, and how it's important that we get a grip of it. Now, for any of you guys that are doing battle in courts, there is a little bit of data that I can share with you that you can keep in mind. I don't think that's the first one I want. Let me just come back here. Here we go. This is the one I want. Now then. That might be a bit big if I can remember what it's like. So I'm just going to close this in a little bit. Hopefully you can see that a bit better. Now, you guys are aware of Chris Hauser. I know this. So, as I said before, I just pointed out what I thought were missing in a lot of his stuff is he doesn't put it across, or he didn't, that it were important you understand if you're moving as beneficiary, you can't be acting as trustee at the same time. We made that clear. I think it's been made clear by Chris himself. So you're on with that. But now looking into the way that Chris moves in relation to how he would deal with anything in court, this is the insight you need to just pull together. So we've got a UK version and we've got a US version of how to use Chris Hauser's data in a nutshell, because we like simplicity, don't we? So in the UK, you would be looking to present in this way. So without prejudice, I, Sean, and then a colon, which you put young, comma, beneficiary. I'm here under fraud, menace, and duress, and thereby challenge jurisdiction. Fiduciary Cheryl, which is the judge, and then the judge's first name, okay, because he is now a fiduciary because you've presented yourself as beneficiary, okay. I am the living beneficiary of the Social Security SESCV Trust, Sean Young, and this is now a trust action, which you are now entrusted as a real party in interest to this action, okay. This court is a colonial court of admiralty under admiralty jurisdiction. See the Colonial Courts Act 1890, wherein said act claims civil jurisdiction in every court of law in a British possession and or every court in England, wherein said court has no jurisdiction over the said living beneficiary who is standing here before you. So that's how you'd use this, the guts of what Chris is giving you on the beneficiary side. That's the UK, so get that in your minds, people, because that is something you would be wise either to keep on paperwork with you at all times in your carriage, or in your horse, or even better still, put it to memory. Now in the US, you would present it in the manner, without prejudice, I shall call on young, comma, beneficiary, I'm here under fraud, menace, and duress, and thereby challenge jurisdiction. Fiduciary Cheryl, and then the judge's name, I am the living beneficiary of the Social Security SESCV Trust, Sean Young, blah, blah, blah. And this is now a trust action, so it's the same. But the important bit for the Americans would be, this court is operating under military admiralty jurisdiction and or maritime law. See title of the United States Code, Lawyers Edition, Interpreted Notes and Decisions. As placing a fringe on the national flag is within the discretion of the President acting as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy, wherein said court has no jurisdiction over the said living beneficiary who is standing here before you. Okay? So, those are your two, the guts of what Chris has given us, because... but pulled into simplicity in relation to how you would affect your standing at any time you're in court. Of course, I would always promote the statutory declaration, but I know it's not easy for people to come to grips with it. But I am here to help for anybody who's serious in using that instrument. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is exceptionally interesting information. Now we can just further that. We will look now at, so this is the Magistrate Court Act 1980, Chapter 43, Part 7. Now, its constitution and place of sitting of court, okay? Now, 1. A magistrate's court shall not try an information summarily or hear a complaint except when composed of at least 2 justices, unless the trial or hearing is one that by virtue of any enactment may take place before a single justice. 2. A magistrate court shall not hold an inquiry into the means of an offender for the purposes of section 82 above, or determine under that section at a hearing at which the offender is not present whether to issue a warrant or commitment except when composed of at least 2 justices. So warrants can't be issued unless it's 2 sitting with 2 justices. And 3 says F2, and then 1 F3. 4. Subject to the provision of any enactment to the contrary, a magistrate court must sit in open court if it is trying summarily an information for an indictable offence, trying an information for a summary offence, imposing imprisonment, hearing a complaint, or holding inquiry into the means of an offender for the purposes of section 82. Okay? So that's your cash. They can't do that. It has to be 2. So all these warrants that are coming around to your doors with these numpties, that's why you need to remind the police. And then it's game over for said numpties. Not the police, the dicks that are trying to play the game. So that's how you stop the police from even if they're assholes, because some are, from supporting the bailiffs. Now 5 is important. It says, a magistrate court composed of a single justice shall not impose imprisonment for a period exceeding 14 days or order a person to pay more than £1. So if you're ever in court and it's a single justice, 14 days, £1. That's it, maximum. And a magistrate's court that is trying a summary offence in accordance with section 16A is restricted to the following in dealing with the accused for the offence. So then there's further data that might be interesting to you from the Magistrate Court Act 1980. But that's very important that you understand what that's saying, because that is important when you're getting these loonies coming round claiming to be holding a warrant. And finally, in this section, an act, so this Admiralty law is civil law, okay? An act to amend the law respecting the exercise of of Admiralty jurisdiction in Her Majesty's dominions and elsewhere out of the United Kingdom, 25th of July 1890. Be enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty by and with the advice and consent of the Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons in this present Parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same as follows. So Lords Spiritual, of course, are your bishops, and Lords Temporal are the peers. This act may be cited as the Colonial Courts of Admiralty Act 1890. Every court of law in British possession which is for the time being declared in pursuance of this act to be a court of Admiralty, or which of no such declaration is in force in the possession as there in original limited civil jurisdiction, shall be a court of Admiralty. So they're telling you, as we looked at houses work, where they don't have any power over the beneficiary present, because you're telling them that you know it's Admiralty, this is where you get it, that it is an Admiralty, so this is your backup for that, yeah? And it's just telling you that they are Admiralty courts, okay? So again, another piece of information and data that is important. What I'll probably do is put these documents, I'll put them up on as documents on the website and then put links to them. And that might get till tomorrow before I can actually do that for you. So there we go. hope that made a lot of sense to you. Because I know maybe the communication from Jim might have been a bit long for you, but once you start to get your grip around that, it's quite there's a lot of data in there to be further investigated. Right, so we got past the map, so I cocked it up, I zoomed it in. Yes, but zoom in. Just got your back office screen now. We can only see you. Right. We will get through this together, says Mike. Well, I think we did. So you could see it. Excellent. Axtag Octothorpe. What's that mean? Agatha? What's that exactly? Octothorpe. I mean, I'm sure it has reference to the octagon. What does that mean exactly? Octothorpe. So I'm not actually sure I've come across that word before. Jay says quite interesting, good. Found it interesting, but need to learn more to unpack it all. Yes, don't we all? Don't we all? But you know, you will pick it up one day. I'm teaching you what I know works. I can't force you to do anything. It's up to you to pick it up. But I'm here and available to non-fruit bat kind of characters. You know what I'm saying? You still have issues with Supreme CT. Supreme. What's that? Supreme CT. Have you missed your A? Regis is King says Igatha, birth certificate versus life birth certificate. Well, the birth certificate cements the living to the surname in uppercase. The original first one is still using your family name, your father's house, which is why it's written in English. Then all of a sudden, the birth certificate is dog Latin because they've now attached your calling, which your parents turned into a name. Yeah? They've turned that into a name. So just back to that, if we want to go. Now, when I drew this at the bottom, that obviously needs to go to this side. So what I might do, I'll either redraw it or I'll just move that off and shift it. So when I did, that's what we're after, the red. Wants to be over here, the flesh and blood, back onto Genesis 1. So as we've got Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick, we've got Genesis 1. What we've got and forgot is Johnny Ray's born, classed as a boy. Not until this trust is created is he now termed a child, which of course is a word of the state. But as Jim has pointed out, that the first bill of exchange that's created is when mum goes on the plan. So they can then revert back to conception date. That is going to be the date and time of importance in relation to this hidden trust that has the estate. So it's really important that you get that. But remember, at this stage here, is boy or girl. Not until you get to this particular point does he become child and then subject to this nonsense through mum and dad, who are now trustees and legally responsible for the child, you know. So that wants to be moved over there, so my apologies. And again, once the calling is put in this mix, then it's held in trust for the Vatican. Interesting. So I just thought I'd clarify a couple of things on that while adding that data that Jim presented and supplied to us. So thanks, Jim, for that. Big kudos, and I hope you can see that I appreciate exactly what you've sent me, and I've been more than happy to further communicate. And also, if you want to Zoom, it's not a problem. We can do that. You've definitely got some interesting data to share, and we've got plenty of data to share as well. So, thanks for that, James. Now then, birth certificate live birth. What about an Australian, same as UK? Well, it should be. Now, obviously, you Australians are so far in deep with this system readying for no hide. They've annihilated the stat deck over in Australia by means of making you fill out a form. That's the only way they'll accept a stat deck. If you wanted to do a stat deck in Australia, you'd have to come to England, create your statutory declaration, get it notarised, but then you'd also have to then send it back to Australia via the embassy. Then you're carrying the jurisdiction from the motherland into the Dominion, and it would stand. Now, whether you'd have to look at what differences there are in relation to what Australia is now running under as relates to this data. So I can't answer that fully, but everything's there. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, Pakistan, Ceylon, any other places that the English system fronting the empire has been implemented, you have all this available to you. It's not about religion, this. The Bible is the law, but understanding this stuff isn't a religious thing. I mean, religion is for the people who need it. And the Christian church was supposed to be encouraging you always to move back to source. But of course, that's not what it's been doing. It's been taking advantage. It's capitalised on it. But there's always remedy. So there's a way to revert to take command, as you're supposed to do at 21. It's not a cut-off point at 21, but that's when the game's set for you to do it, to be welcome. We have to learn how we do this. Without us... You see, we did some interesting study a couple of weeks ago and found that if you're not careful, you can end up coming in the back way in the system, and that in ancient times was actually the original meaning of the term sodomy. Coming in the back door. Yeah. So let's say that the mystery school, as the world was set up to filter your people to your station, that's been took over and it's all been inverted now. And something else is benefiting from this system at your expense. And because you're ignorant of that fact, they're managing to get away with it. And if they can get away with it, push everything into this fourth trust. You won't even be the trustee. You know what I'm saying? You won't even be a trustee. It's that slave. If you can't contract, that's what the term slave actually defines. One who can't contract. Where are we? Tilly AP says, you're spot on with your stuff, young man. Well, thank you, Tilly. It's good that people get it. And I have to say, a lot of emails I'm getting these days, either I'm getting better at explaining it, or people themselves are starting to understand it, or at least have the balls to try get stuck in and learn it, because it's important you learn it. And as I've said, I'm here. I'm always available, but not for fruit bats. And I can spot a fruit bat a mile off, so... And I can see very quickly whether A, you've got potential to grasp it, or B, at least have the balls to apply it. But it comes back to the statutory declaration. Get your heads into it. I've said it's a remedy. It's an instrument of power. And you need, if you want, because it's what you want. You want to protect yourself, to pull yourself back to that dominion of self. It's what you're aiming for. But you have to do it. You can't just sit there fantasizing about it. You have to first understand it and then start to implement it. Looking forward to listening to this again. You came in late, not a problem, Tilly. You might enjoy that. Questions, those questioning you before you go about verifying your identity. Burden of proof. Question everything. Everything they offer you, answer with a question. And then you're on an equal footing with them. yeah, and knowledge. You are their equal. And the more you know, you can very quickly become the better. So if I'm ringing, say like I've rang the court, for instance, um, you obviously you're talking to just a receptionist or someone that's a bit savvy with certain things. But as soon as you start talking at another level, they'll pass you on to a lawyer. And then if you go above that, you'll get passed on to an higher. You know what I'm saying? And so it is important that you grasp it. You understand what it is you're doing, because then you're putting yourselves on an equal footing with them. You're not going to war with them. I mean, they'll try it on, but once they know that you can't, you'll get passed on to somebody at the next level, and away you go again. Live birth certificate proves contract without your consent. Well, none of it's your consent, Joe, until in their world you start signing it off, proclaiming it, etc., etc. Is this being recorded? Yeah, it'll be recorded, Tilly. It'll come on actually as soon as I finish. It'll be up. It's usually pretty bad quality at first, but it's not about looking. It's about hearing, isn't it? Really. Australia can also refer to US law due to registration of Australia. Yeah. Well, we can as well. So if you go in the Chris Hauser route, you're dealing in American law, aren't you? Their codes. So yeah, I mean, we are the West as a conglomerate, and people who like to poo-poo it. It's such an enormous body of sensibility. It's just that it's been took over by all the shitheads, the dicks, the idiots, people that want to screw you over so that they can feel better about themselves. Capitalism, that's the way it is. I will capitalise on your efforts. Now, that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but it's, there has to be lads, fair play. There has to be a reciprocal. You can't just walk over people for your own gain. Otherwise, you're not going to get it. You're not playing the game correctly. So how does this apply to people from other countries with the birth certificate? Well, then you're looking at you've got to remember, most of the global systems now are coming in on par, which is why they spent so much time moving to undermine England without the English having a clue. And I really feel that, they're about to try the finale of it in this next adventure in May, if they can get away with it. And then there will be no more England. They will not be referring to English law, they'll be referring to Scottish Rite, Freemasonry, or the Roman Empire, Admiralty, Maritime, Ecclesiastical, and nothing else. That's how important it is that people get a grip. Now, I've given up on English people. English people are far happier toss-arsing around, watching porn, and looking cool and good. I had my son around here the other day, and he was showing me. I said, who's big today in trance? Let's have a look. So he pulled up this German guy, Boris Berserker or something. I liked him, very good music. I said, that's trance that we used to listen to in clubs. He said, no, it's actually called such and such a thing. I said, yeah, well, it is actually trance. So they're changing everything. Everything. And calling it different names. So it's not just in law, in everything, they're changing the whole show. But what we did ascertain is, because I was watching this big club we were playing at, and whereas back in the 90s, when everybody were on the happy pills, everybody were dancing. Nobody gave a shit what they looked like. Nobody were caring about that. Everybody were dancing and sweating. But they were all dressed up to nines anyway, as a general rule. But when you watch today's gig, they're not. They're more only concerned about how they look. Do I look fantastic and amazing? Well, no, you don't, because you're in a nightclub. Great music on, and you look like one of them dollies in a window with clothes on. And that is a massive difference to behold in relation to just the difference between the clubs. So it's the same music, but it's the attitude, and that is definitely because ecstasy gives you a complete oneness, whereas cocaine, it's all about the ego in it. You know, how am I looking here? Do I look good to my left or to my right? Is that chick over there seeing how gorgeous I am? Blah, blah. So I don't know in all countries, but this birth certificate shenanigans, and as we said, that European thing now in Strasbourg is where all these registrars are now being, and it named a lot of countries. So yeah, it should be. The trouble is, in the European nations and further afield, you never see any signs that people are interested in this kind of stuff. Ever. It's all in Western nations, or nations that have been touched by England. Not the Empire, English law, the English civil system. If you've been touched by it through whatever means, it's there. But of course, in Australia, they've been obfuscating it for a long, long time. They've put a shadow one in over the top of, and pretty much set it in stone that lawyers can't really help you if you move outside of that. So, Oz is more and more difficult, but there is always a way. We have just to get clever and smart and think and be prepared to do things. But if you're an Aussie and you can, get over here, get yourself one set up, send it back via embassies, in you go. You are now under the original standing of the Statutory Declarations Act. But other countries, you should start looking. And if you find, send it to me. Well, let's see if we can start putting pages together on my website, etc., so that other countries can understand their version of this kind of thing. Because it carries for everybody. They've got everybody under this this hidden, dark, Holy Spirit side of things. That they, it's obviously a mimic of the one that's acceptable. So birth cert in Australia was encrypted in the 70s when Medicare came about. Encrypted? What do you mean? What do you mean encrypted? From who? You? Because you have a right to the record, the public record, not the hidden one that we discuss often. So I'd be interested to know what you mean by that. Encrypted. Strasbourg, as Untitled reminds me, is the CIEC. All the registrars now have been being instructed by that. Although there are 6 nations that are observing, Vatican being one. US birth certificate numbers align with trust, whereas in Australia they do not. It's harder to decode. It's like I said, they've done so much to put another system in Australia. It is getting more and more difficult over there for you to come in with on anything other than person. But even so, on the Admiralty Act that we presented there and the method of Chris Hauser, which broke down so that you fully understand it without having to go through 40 million videos, that's the crutch of what Chris Hauser is saying and is using when it comes to dealing with anybody, any court that's magistrate or not, let's say, chancery. And then, I've been listening to your videos for some time, but it takes me ages to comprehend your accent, which is lovely, by the way, your stuff. To be honest with you, I actually put on the accent a bit more. I don't actually talk broad in general terms. I do actually put it on a bit. Because I like to remind the Northerners that they're Northerners. And I like to remind the Southerners that they're not Northerners. You know what I'm saying? And that's it. Because there is a line drawn south of Derby. And anything down is Southern and anything up, it's rock and roll. But yeah, I suppose maybe I might come back off the Lancashire accent. Everybody knows now I'm a Northerner, so I don't really need to. And maybe I should start speaking posh as usual. Put my phone voice on, maybe. Now I have some teeth. When I put them in, it makes me speak posh. I even speak like King Charles. How about that? And that's just with teeth. So I do blame the 90s for my common northern accent. Well, Tilly, I'm glad you've been listening, and I hope you've learned something from it anyway, because that's all that matters. Iggy says, I think both is true. Your explanations and the awareness are growing. Yeah, which you can only be good, can't it? You know, don't focus so much on all the nonsense they got going. Focus to putting yourself correct in relation to this monster that's going apeshit. So, no worries, says, I'm so glad we met, and in the last few weeks we shared so much, and I'm so positive, Sean. We will win, says Untitled. Well, there we go. LFX says, ain't the BC the gift? It is the gift. It's the valuable token. ID, discharge. ID, discharge. ID's on the hidden side, discharge. Yeah. We've just gone through the beneficiary. Go back to them Houser's script. If nothing else today, if what James fetched is a bit above, because I suppose to understand what James is saying, you would have to have a serious amount of data already on board to get what he's saying. But for you out there in general, especially when you're dealing with these tossers that are coming to your door and saying they've got a warrant, go back to those Houser's bit and then through the acts so that you've got the data there, you know the authorities that you're enforcing. You present that, and any constables that are sat there, stood there with their hands in the thing, like both in their hands, etc., etc., they look all shitty badge on. It'll soon remove said parties who are then any further interaction breaching your peace. I'll have to march them up back to the little van. Make sure you make it clear they are not welcome to trespass on this property, and that notice is also given to their principal and all others involved in the same companies. Always better if you've rewritten it. You know, there you go. Serve them. Serve them. Serve them with paperwork. And what makes you think that because somebody's come to your door with some paper that you can't have somebody going, well, there you go, read that first, and if you put that in the right order, they're going to shit itself and just whittle away, aren't they? Start to take your power back. Yeah, first part is learning. The most difficult part is moving from learning to acting, because you're going to get your nose bopped every now and again, but be ready to get your nose bopped every again, and be ready also sometimes to make a tactical retreat. If you're doing something and you've made a mistake, don't keep banging your head against a brick wall because you're stubborn. Recognise you've cocked up, set it right so that you can live for tomorrow and crack on again, having learned that little mistake. This is where it's about. It's where are you at, courage? Where's your courage? And, you know, courage comes the more that you recognise that you have value. You have value as a spiritual being, not as that image in the mirror. Because that image in the mirror is just the avatar created by the confluence of the genetics put together by mother and father. That's all it is. It's a suit. You're not it. You are you. So how far inside of you to get back to your source can you go? And it's about, as I say always, it's cleansing the breath, today known as the soul. Of all the shit, the poisons, the codings, the latent in and around that avatar that you're inside, experience is shindig. So, one last look at you guys. Alex says forced commercial intercourse. Yeah, now that's another one because that's rape. Isn't it? Forced intercourse. They don't like that when you make. I have used that once to a copper and he shriveled up. A long time ago. Yeah, this is the thing. It's everybody's running away from the certified copies. They are the valuable instruments. But the most important thing to remember is it's not you. You are not it. You are using it to play on the board game. But that's the difficult part, separation. The separation of you from that person. the person that owes all the money, the person that has to jump up and down and dance, it isn't you, unless you're using it as ID. Because if you are, it means that inside of yourself, you still believe that you are it. Just like you believe you are it when you look in that mirror. You're not. It is a cesspool. Nick, I also heard on the grapevine of the land it occurred on being contemptuous for a number of years. I'm not sure what you mean there. As I think Chris Harrison does 1099, I think he does. That's all UCC, that's correct. In what way, Igatha? Okay, UCC is global utility, it's law of commerce, exactly. So other countries need to start getting into this stuff. This is why England's caused so much problems for all these imperial nonsense. It's because they got stuck into law, whereas other nations are just accepting, and they really don't seem to care about this kind of stuff in most European nations. It's very rare you come across somebody in a European country involved in this. It really doesn't seem to happen. They just, they don't have any sense of self, of freedom, because they just don't have any recognition that there's a difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. They were also stopping a major CSG venture expansion. The property occurred on had been pervaded for top. So you guys are talking on something there. Approved, made, the land on super, blah, 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 blah. Now that's another thing. Take note. All these poisonings that they're doing, like the trail derailments in Ohio, there's been another one. They're poisoning all sorts of places, also the same with Fukushima. What they're actually doing, because they've got a big raft of statutes in the background that they can take over contaminated land. That's what they're doing it for. They have a massive raft of power all for themselves to take over any land deemed toxic. There you go. The answer to all the nonsense that's going on as to why they're doing this. And fracking. Now, does that not now show itself as to the real reason that they want to frack in areas like all over America? Because it poisons the land, the water table. And we just have to take it over. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? Except, thanks for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I hope you got something from this. But those parts on law we've done today are so important to you. I really do strongly advise that you give it some of your best attention. Especially because it'll help you with those dicks that come to the door and claim they have a warrant. No, they do not. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will say, thanks for joining, and until the next time.
electronic